Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is the Sports Geek, and today we have a great guest, Marcus Mosher. He's an NFL writer and analyst. He's got decades of experience in podcasting and working for various NFL websites, including Bleacher Report and Pro Football Focus. Marcus, thanks so much for taking the time today to join us.
Of course, I'm excited to talk about some Week 4 action. Should be a lot of fun.
First, I just want to kind of start with you and your background. When did you start writing about the NFL? When did you start getting interested in working, in the football context?
I've been a fan of the NFL since I was born. I'm pretty sure, according to my mom and dad, at least, my first word was football. So I've been involved in this thing for a while now. But professionally, I was in college and I just had a bunch of free time, right? And so I went to this computer lab, if you remember these computer labs were a thing, and started a blog like in 2011, 2012. And eventually that caught on and that led to some other small freelance jobs. But as of 2015, I've been working in the NFL full time for a couple different websites, including USA Today, Pro Football Focus, 33rd Team. So it's been a while that we've been at this thing.
So what do you like doing the most? Do you mainly like writing or making content? What's kind of your go-to thing?
To me, it's all basically the same, right? Like if you know football, I have no problem talking about it, writing about it, blogging, making videos, whatever you want to do. But I think what we're doing now is the most fun. I love just having general football conversations and talking about how we think a game is going to go or how a team is going to perform. I think that's the most fun part of this whole gig. And when I tell people what I do for a living, I just say I talk football. Like it's really that simple.
It's a great gig. Being a fan of a certain team, being a Cowboys fan like yourself, how do you balance objectivity there? I'm sure you want to write like the Cowboys are great. Trust me, the season's not over. But how do you also be objective at the same time?
Well, here's the thing with the Cowboys. I grew up as a 2000s Cowboy fan, which means I was alive, but I don't remember the Super Bowl wins of the 90s. So I'm actually like the opposite end of the Cowboy fans. I'm not a optimistic Cowboy fan at all because the only thing I know is heartbreak for the Cowboys, right? So I tend to lean more pessimistic where I think everything, the sky is always falling. But it is a challenge to try to be optimistic and not biased. And what I always say is that everybody has their biases, right? Everybody has certain teams they like and don't like, or players they like and they don't like. And you just have to acknowledge it. If you acknowledge it, I think the fans or the readers or the listeners will be more appreciative of that. So I know when it comes to the Cowboys, maybe I am too negative. And that might balance out somebody who I'm hosting a podcast with who is a little bit more positive than I am.
I guess we won't be seeing Dak Prescott in any top 5 quarterback rankings, but
probably not. Although he's not too far off, though.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have a favorite memorable experience as a sports journalist?
It's a really good question. Probably the first time I wrote an article in a blog back, I think it was 2013. I was writing a scouting report on the great Tavon Austin coming into the draft. And I remember Tavon retweeted it, and it was like the coolest thing ever in the world. This college kid writing a article on one of his favorite players, and Tavon Austin retweeting it. But like professionally, I think the first time like one of my articles or one of my blog entries kind of went quote unquote viral, whatever you want to call it. And just to see people notice your content, and agree, disagree, whatever, but to actually take the time and read it, I always think is so cool. Anybody that reads my stuff, I'm always very, very gracious for.
Tavon Austin's definitely, he's got one of the best, college highlight tapes ever.
It'll never be beaten. I'm going to show my grandkids it someday.
I want to talk a little bit about the Beat the Geek challenge. So for everybody listening, the most important storyline of the NFL season is obviously Beat the Geek challenge here at the Sports Geek. So basically, if you haven't signed up yet, click the link in our bio and you can enter. And all you have to do is pick the spreads for every single week in the NFL. And if you beat our AI tool, the Geek, you can win a bunch of prizes. We're talking gift cards, MacBooks, an NFL trip to the game of your choice. Definitely give that a look and sign up ASAP. Marcus, you've done exceptionally well in this challenge. You're third place overall, and you're beating our AI tool. How do you go about making your picks? So what's your strategy that goes into it?
So I've been doing this a while when it comes to betting. Even before I started creating content, my dad and I, we'd get into the car, we'd grab a USA Today newspaper, and we go through every game, and then we look at the spread and try to basically guess how we thought the game was going to go. And that's how I still make my picks. What I do every Wednesday, Thursday is I look at the schedule and I will write down how I think a game is going to go. For example, let's say we're looking at the Steelers-Colts game this weekend, right? I think this is going to be a really low-scoring game. I have a hard time envisioning the Colts scoring 17 points. So I'm going to go with Steelers 20, Colts 17, and then I'll look at the line, right? And in this case, the Steelers are 1-point favorites. So to me, that's an easy pick. I'm taking the Steelers -1, 1.5. And if you do that before looking at the spreads, you can kind of get a good idea and good feel of how you think these games are going to go. I think that's a better strategy than just looking at the spread and trying to make a decision that way, because you can get kind of blinded when you see, oh, this team is a 4.5-point underdog. I'm taking them outright. That's just too many points. You have to kind of think about the game script and how you think the flow of the game is going to go.
That makes sense. I do the same thing. I'll pull up a sports book. I'll cover the spread line, and I'll just be like, yeah, I think, the Saints should be 5-point favorites. And then they're 2-point favorites. It's like, oh, okay, now I know who to bet.
And when I bet, I only bet on the spreads where I think I'm off by 2 or 3 points. So, for example, let's keep using the Steelers example. If I think the Steelers are going to win by a touchdown and that spread's only 1, that will be the actual game that I bet on this week. But if it comes down to it's a point or a half a point, I tend to try to stay away from those games because in my mind, it's too much of a coin flip. So I'm looking where I think there's the biggest difference between my predictions and what the line is.
Is the spread mainly the thing that you bet on the most, or do you do over-unders and money lines as well and props?
I don't do the totals very often because generally when I watch a game, I don't want to be rooting for points to be scored or not being scored. So I tend to actually bet mostly money lines because I tend to have a pretty good idea, and I'm not bragging, I'm just saying, tend to have a pretty good idea of who I think is going to win a game. And rather than having to worry about, okay, they've got to make sure they kick the field goal here to cover this spread, I just want to be on the right team. And I know the value doesn't pay off as well there. But I think that's, for me, as a personal bettor, that's the way I enjoy betting on the NFL the most.
And I think I hear similar things when people talk about fantasy football. They hate the way it makes them root for games. And I experience it the same thing. Like, for example, I'm a Saints fan. We'll talk about the Saints a little later. But, if I have Chris Olave on my team and Alvin Kamara scores a touchdown, I don't ever want to even be a little upset because my team just scored. Yeah. But fantasy, and I would say betting on player props, kind of lets that happen a lot.
Yeah, and I happen to host a fantasy podcast over at the Locked On Podcast Network, and we talk about this all the time, right? Like, fantasy football should be fun. So draft and build a team that is fun for you to watch, because it's no fun if you're having to, you said you're a Saints fan, right? If you're drafting all these Falcons players and now you're actively rooting for the Falcons, like, that's just not going to be an enjoyable experience. You'd rather lose and root for the players that you want to root for than to do that. Make fantasy fun, draft the players that you want to draft. And then for betting, same thing. If you want to bet on just this one team to win, I think that's sometimes more enjoyable than having to worry about point spreads or totals or adjusted lines or anything like that.
How many fantasy leagues are you in right now?
This is a bad question.
Oh, no.
So I tell my wife that I'm in like 5. But the real answer is like triple that. I play in about 14, 15 leagues that I manage, and then a whole bunch of leagues where I draft. And you forget it, the best ball drafts where you can draft hundreds and hundreds of teams. But 15, I believe, is the number of teams that I actually manage this season.
Do you have a lot of success? I mean, you're saying basically try to draft people that you like watching. Do you treat this as like, I'm going to make money off of fantasy? Or is this almost purely a hobby?
I think if you're trying to play fantasy to make money, you're in it for the wrong reasons, right? I'm in fantasy because I want to beat my cousins and my aunts and uncles that are in the leagues with me, right? I want the bragging, right? So it's not the money, but at the same time, I want my experience in fantasy to be enjoyable. So I am going to draft the players that I want to watch. I'm not going to draft players from teams that I absolutely want to lose. Like, I'm going to give you an example. I can't stand the Pittsburgh Steelers. I live in Pennsylvania. The Steeler fans are the worst. I'm not drafting Steeler players because I don't want to root for them, right? So yes, maybe I'm losing some value And maybe there's a couple players that pop off on that team, but I just have no desire or interest to root for those guys. You can still build a championship level team in fantasy if you decide to ignore one or two teams. You'll be fine.
Let's jump into some big NFL storylines that, I want to talk with you about. Starting off in the state that I'm currently based in, New York, the New York Jets probably had some of the most hype coming into the season because of what we didn't receive with Aaron Rodgers last year, and how will he fare this year? How do you think he's looked so far this season?
I thought he's gotten better in each game. You can tell he's more comfortable. He's starting to make plays outside the pocket. There was even a play last week against New England where there was I believe it was offsetting penalties, but he got outside the pocket, threw the ball down the field to Garrett Wilson. They didn't connect, but on that play, you saw Rodgers moving well like he did 3, 4, 5 years ago. So that's really encouraging. When I start to rank and stack these teams in the AFC, the Chiefs, the Bills, you don't get very far before you put the Jets there. I think they are one of the most complete teams in the league. And I think they're built to win in December, in January. I feel pretty confident that this Jets team is a playoff team. And against certain matchups like Buffalo and Kansas City, I would not want to see New York at all.
Yeah, they got the experience for sure with AR. Do you think this is going to be his last year?
My guess is no. I think he's going to want one more year because I do think they're going to have some success this year. I think they're going to win double-digit games. We'll see what they do in the playoffs, but if Rodgers plays well and this Jets team is good, I can't see why he wouldn't want to come back for one more shot at this, assuming he stays healthy. Now, if he suffers another significant injury, I could see the Jets wanting to turn the page and get younger, but so far, I think there's no reason to think why he wouldn't be back in 2025.
If he suffers another bad injury, yeah, I think it's over. It's GG's.
Yeah.
Let's pivot here to another AFC team, the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, everybody loves talking about the Chiefs. We love seeing them on commercials and all the rest, but they're chasing history this season with a potential three-peat. Do you think this team is more built for this championship than the past two? I think I do.
It depends. They are not playing great football right now, despite being 3-0. Like if you compare their wins to like the Bills' wins, the Bills have been far more impressive. But the Chiefs also know that you can't win a Super Bowl in September, right? So they're not using Travis Kelce over the middle of the field a bunch. They're not really unleashing Patrick Mahomes to throw a bunch of passes down the field. I think they know that it's a long season. Let's just try to grind out these wins. Let's win our division. Let's be a top 3 seed. And then we'll see where we go. Here's their biggest advantage, is that they match up really well with just about every team in the AFC, right? Like they have the defense that can shut down a Lamar Jackson. They have the defense that can at least contain a Josh Allen. I do think there's some teams in the NFC that could give them problems, but in the AFC, I don't see anybody going to Arrowhead and beating them.
Would you agree that I feel like it happens every year where people doubt the Chiefs? Last year, everyone was like, the receivers are all trash. No way they can win. And I think people forget that Mahomes doesn't not commit turnovers. I've seen many games where, he's had these weird interceptions and you're like, is this a different Mahomes? And the same thing's kind of happening this season. And I think we're all falling into the same trap, the Chiefs, frauds, whatever. But I feel like this happens pretty much every year with them. They're not a perfect regular season team.
They're not. And one of the things that you can tell that's so different about the regular season Chiefs versus the playoff Chiefs is the willingness of Patrick Mahomes to run. He's just not going to run in these regular season games because he doesn't want to put his body in jeopardy. But when they get to the playoffs and he can extend plays and he can use his legs to pick up third downs, that's when they become really dangerous. But again, there is no reason to risk him now, just like there's no reason to really overwork Travis Kelce in September. I know everybody thinks Travis Kelce is washed, and I do think he is a little bit. Remember, he's the same age as Rob Gronkowski, who has been out of the NFL for multiple years now and retired twice already.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's same age as Gronk. They are trying to save Travis Kelce, so when we get to January and February, he is healthy and ready to go. I don't think you're going to see him have a 900-yard season with double-digit touchdowns because they don't need to overwork him now.
Yeah, there's no point if you're kind of a lock for the playoffs, which it definitely seems like they are. I remember last year in the playoffs, they were playing Miami in that super cold game. I think it was below zero after wind chill and stuff like that. This might be a weird question, but I have always kind of felt that it's kind of BS where teams play the majority of the regular season trying to get into the playoffs in warmer weather. And then when it comes time to the playoffs, the game takes a big shift. The skill of being able to catch balls and throw balls in the cold and take hits in the cold is huge if you're trying to win a Super Bowl and it's not going through your house if you have a dome. Do you think that it's right that, I mean, seemingly Mahomes and Kelsey have mastered playing in the cold? Do you think all teams should play in domes? Do you think something should change about this whole playoffs in the winter thing?
So I've gone back and forth in this a lot because I do think there is a big disadvantage to teams that play indoors when they have to go play outdoors in the playoffs. They're just not used to that. And the argument always is, well, be tougher, be better in the cold. It's hard to be tougher and better in the cold if you only play in it once a year compared to other teams like Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, New York that do it all year long, right? Like once we get to October here in Pennsylvania, it gets really cold. So you're used to tackling and blocking and catching passes with frozen balls. It's just not the case for teams that live in some of the southern states or play in domes. Is it fair? No. Do I want to see the NFL change it? Probably not, because I do think some of that weather stuff makes these games memorable, right? Like you think of the game where Tom Coughlin's face almost froze off when they were playing the Packers, right? Like that was a really cold weather game, hard fought game. Some of the most memorable games in NFL history have been some weather games, whether it's snow, rain, sleet, whatever. I can make arguments for both sides, but I think ultimately I lean on the side of cold weather games. Bad weather games are kind of fun.
I agree. They're definitely fun. It's like when you think about the Dolphins, it's like even with Tua, I think a lot of us just viewed them as, okay, they're going to be great in the regular season. They're fun to watch, but they'll be 5-point underdogs to the Chiefs.
And this is the thing with the Dolphins. This is why I think the regular season matters so much more to them, right? Like, because if they can get home field advantage, I do wonder how a team like Buffalo or Pittsburgh would do playing in January in Miami. Maybe they wouldn't be used to playing in that humidity. So I think they have an advantage as well. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen that play out yet.
Now, would you ever root for the Chiefs? Like, are you interested from a personal perspective in rooting for a team to have that three-peat glory, or do you view them as the villain?
I'm kind of indifferent. I really respect Andy Reid. I don't know how you couldn't. Patrick Mahomes is going to go down as either the best quarterback of all time or the second best quarterback of all time. And I think it's pretty cool to witness it. You know, we are witnessing this live, like this NFL history. We'll see if it happens. To me, honestly, it depends on who they play, right? As a Cowboy fan, if they play the Philadelphia Eagles or San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl, you can bet that I'm rooting for the Chiefs. Like, it's not even a debate. But if it's a team like the Lions, who are fun to watch and fun to root for, I probably would be rooting for Detroit. So to me, I'm indifferent. I'm good either way. I think it just depends on the matchup.
All right, now let's talk about Taylor Swift. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, enough about the Chiefs. Let's move on.
My sister would love this podcast if we did that. That'd be great.
We're seeing a kind of a weird thing here with the younger quarterbacks. We got a bunch of them in the league right now. Some are playing great. Some are playing terribly. Some are playing, we don't really know if they're going to be good or not. So what do you think about this whole, in the past two drafts, the second pick seems to be the winner? And are Caleb Williams and Bryce Young busts or soon to be busts?
Well, I loved Bryce Young pre-draft, but even I could admit this is not going to work out. Like, you could tell pretty quickly into the NFL that he was just too small. Now, we have other quarterbacks that are small. Kyler Murray is shorter than what Bryce Young is, but there's no debate who's the better athlete there. And a lot of times Kyler is able to get out of those bad situations because of his athleticism. So Bryce Young, yes. Caleb, it's way too early on Caleb. And in fact, if you ask me right now to pick between Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams long-term, I would still lean Caleb Williams because I like Caleb Williams pre-draft. I liked his tape. And through 3 games, I know Jaden's been better. I'm just not willing to give up. One of the things, though, that we've seen when it comes to drafting these young quarterbacks is that the organization and the franchise matters almost as much as the player and the talent does, right? You need to have an organization and a franchise and a coach that knows how to put together an offense to help that quarterback be successful. We saw with a lot of these quarterbacks, they're thrown in on really bad teams with bad coaches and bad offensive lines and asking them to go save the franchise. And that's just not realistic. You can't do that. You need to have an infrastructure in place that'll help that quarterback grow. And that's why I think a lot of these teams like Kansas City and Green Bay, who draft quarterbacks in round one and let them sit for a year or 2 years or 3 years in Jordan Love's case, isn't a bad strategy because it gives that quarterback time to practice, develop, and it gives the franchise time to put the right pieces around them so that when they get into the lineup, they can be successful. They know the plays that they're going to run. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more teams go to that method of drafting quarterbacks early and sitting them. And we have seen it already this year. Drake May is sitting. Michael Penix is sitting. I want to see how those two quarterbacks do after waiting it out a little bit.
I got to touch on Michael Penix since you just brought him up. When do you think he's going to get his first NFL start?
I think it's going to be this year. And I don't know if it's going to be – I think Kirk Cousins has looked better over the last couple of games. That first game against Pittsburgh, man, it was rough. I think he's looked better, but I do think there's going to be a point in the season where Atlanta needs the vertical passing attack. Drake London, a really good receiver, is averaging under 10 yards per catch. Kyle Pitts is not being used down the field. They need to start stretching the field vertically if the rushing attack wants to take off. We know Michael Penix did that well at Washington. I think at some point this year, the Falcons are going to make that switch over to Michael Penix.
I mean, I wouldn't, as a Saints fan, I don't think I would be opposed because that would imply things have kind of gone off the rails in Atlanta. So
we'll see. I mean, there's also just a chance that this Falcons team isn't very good. And if they end up, if they lose to the Saints this weekend and they're 1-3 and we get to the middle of the point of the season and they're 3, 4, 5 games below 500, I think it makes sense to put Penix in to see what you got.
Talking about Cousins, it kind of made me think, like watching this most recent primetime game with the Commanders and the Bengals, we saw an awesome performance with Jaden Daniels. And I agree with you in that I think Caleb Williams will probably be better long-term, but these primetime games when everybody's watching is the time when everybody loves to jump to massive conclusions. And I know there's like a big kind of narrative out there that Kirk Cousins kind of sucks just because he did awful on primetime for years and years. Do you experience that just working in sports, just the massive overreactions on primetime? Does it annoy you? There's
been a study, and I cannot remember the name of the study now, but where NFL fans usually will weight a primetime performance about 5 times more than a regular Sunday afternoon 1 o'clock game. So people are going to remember Jaden Daniels could have 3 terrible games in a row, but I believe they play at 1 o'clock Eastern the next 3 weeks. People just aren't going to care, right? Because they're going to be watching Red Zone. They're going to be watching their favorite teams. What they'll remember is that standalone game on Monday Night Football where he beat the Bengals by himself, right? So there's absolutely a primetime phenomenon in the NFL. And it goes for the quarterbacks that play well and play poorly. I think for Kirk Cousins, who played really well against the Eagles in the second half of that game, people are going to remember that game coming back and winning, even if he struggles over the next couple of weeks. So yes, primetime games are unfortunately overweighted. And I don't see that changing anytime soon because the average fan doesn't have the chance to go back and watch the All-22 or watch a broadcast of a game that they weren't paying attention to earlier. So I think it's going to continue to be an issue.
Yeah, and I think NFL fans just have a short-term memory. Like I was watching the Saints Cowboys game, and you can look on Twitter, and Derek Carr's having an amazing game. Like, he'll throw an interception at the end, and people just be like, "Oh, this guy's trash." No, same Derek Carr. It's like, okay.
Well, and there's also a lack of context, right? So Derek Carr plays really well against Dallas in week 2. In week 3, he loses multiple offensive linemen due to an injury, and he's playing a much better defensive front in the Philadelphia Eagles, and he doesn't have a great game, which is understandable, and now he's trash again. That's not fair to Derek Carr, right? And maybe he wasn't as good as what we saw against the Cowboys, but he's certainly not as bad as what we saw against Philadelphia either.
For sure. Segueing into Dallas, as you mentioned and as I brought up, tell me about your hopes and dreams going into the season and how has that changed?
I hope we make it through the season. That's about my hope right now. My honest hope is that I just want them to be competitive. There's nothing worse than when you get to Thanksgiving. In the Cowboys case, they play on Thanksgiving every year. If there's nothing worse when you get to Thanksgiving, your team is already out of it. They're not even in contention to make a playoff spot. I recognize that this Cowboys team is not as good as they were over the last 3 years. I just want them to have a chance of making the playoffs, sneaking in, because once you get to the playoffs, anything can happen, right? The ball can bounce funny ways. Maybe you get some injury luck. You play a team that's banged up. I just would like to see this team get better as the year goes on, stay competitive. But the idea that this is one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the NFC, I think that hope is all gone.
And who do you blame, or do you blame everybody? And if you do blame somebody, who's more to blame, Dak, Mike, or Jerry Jones?
I think all 3 have differing levels of blame here. I think Dak gets the lowest blame because he doesn't play defense, right? Like, it didn't matter how well he played against the Saints. They weren't winning that game because the defense was so awful, right? Mike McCarthy gets more blame because he's the head coach. He's in charge of making hires. He's in charge of getting this team prepared. And they just looked flat the last 2 weeks against the Saints and the Ravens. But ultimately, Jerry Jones gets the most blame here because he's the one that decided to bring back Mike McCarthy in year 5. He's the one that decided to hire Mike Zimmer again. He's the one that built this roster. And frankly, this roster has aged and it's declined. It's just not the same roster that we've seen over the last couple of years. And there's reasons for that. They've spent a lot of money on players over the last couple of years. They've lost Tyron Smith. They've lost all their defensive line depth. But there are still ways to make your football team better. And they just didn't do it this offseason. They didn't sign anybody. They signed Ezekiel Elliott. Let me take that back. They signed Zeke, which is basically they didn't sign anybody. We've seen teams like the Saints and Mickey Loomis and what they do over there. They can consistently restructure the cap and do these deals to make it so they're competitive every year. The Cowboys just have no interest in doing that. Jerry Jones has no interest in doing that. So he's the one that gets the most blame here.
Give me a final record prediction, Dallas Cowboys.
I'm gonna go 9-8. Their schedule at the end of the year is pretty soft, and I think they should be able to rack up wins. But it starts with getting some of these wins against the Giants, the Steelers, the Lions, all tough games for them. They've got to figure out a way to at least be 500, get to Thanksgiving, and that's when I think they can rack up 4 or 5 wins in that stretch.
One last question before we go into some kind of rapid fire type questions. What team has been the biggest surprise for you? I guess you could give me biggest surprise, meaning they outperformed expectations, and then underwhelmed.
Well, to me, it's Minnesota. I mean, you expect them to beat the Giants in week 1, but remember, this is a team that lost their rookie quarterback in the preseason. They had several injuries in the secondary, including a 3rd-round pick who passed away before the season started. If you looked at that schedule early on and you see Giants, San Francisco, Texans, you're thinking 1-2 easily. Like, hey, just survive that stretch. We'll see what we can do. But they're 3-0, and they clobber the 49ers and Texans. Those games were not competitive at all. Sam Darnold's playing the best football that we've ever seen. Brian Flores is a madman on defense. I'm starting to think there's a chance that this Vikings team could win their division. And I don't think any quarterbacks want to play against Brian Flores' defense because they blitz at an absurd rate. And for most disappointing, to me, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. When you have a schedule of the Patriots, Chiefs, tough game, and the Commanders in the first 3 weeks of the season, you need to be 2-1 at minimum. To be 0-3 with a healthy Joe Burrow, a healthy Jamar Chase, T. Higgins back in week 3, a fairly healthy offensive line, it's embarrassing. And their schedule only gets harder with a bunch of division games coming up. They play the NFC East this year, so the games against the Cowboys and the Eagles. I think there's a real chance that this Bengals team is only going to finish the year with 4 or 5 wins. And that just shouldn't happen when you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow on your side.
Yeah, and you guys watching, Sports Geek gave out Sam Darnold Comeback Player of the Year at the beginning of the season. Be sure to follow so you don't miss out on picks like that. But yeah, he's played awesome. All right, so let's go into some. Well, first, before we do this, just do the Saints make the playoffs? Are they contenders or are they pretenders?
Oh, they're contenders. Their defense is for real. Now, I am concerned about the offensive line. We'll see how long Eric McCoy is out and some of the other guys there, but their defense is a unit, man. They played really well against Philadelphia outside of that one long play to Dallas Goedert. Their defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. So I do think they're going to be a wild card team in the NFC.
All right, let's go to some kind of rapid fire questions. I'm going to give you two options, and you just kind of give me which one you prefer or which one you think. Pick one, assuming the other is mediocre. Offense or defense? A great offense or a great defense?
I would rather have the great offense because I think that matters when we get to the playoffs more. I know there's always this adage that defense wins championships. It's really the offenses. Go look at how many points these offenses are scoring when we get to the Super Bowl. I would rather have the great offense because most of the time they're going to be able to put up points against a good defense.
If you're picking a wide receiver, what's more important to you? Drop dead speed or hands that, won't drop anything?
Speed. Because I can live with drops if you're creating a bunch of big plays down the field. Tyreek Hill is always one of the highest leaders in drops every year, but his speed is terrifying. He makes defensive coordinators stay up late at night trying to figure out how to defend every blade of grass in the football field. I would rather have the speed. I can live with the drops.
Thursday night football, Sunday night football, or Monday night football?
This one's easy. Sunday Night Football, first of all, is fantastic. The product is amazing. I love Chris Collinsworth, so that one's easy for me. Monday Night's Football, I really like now that they got Troy Aikman and Joe Buck. It feels like an event again. I loathe Thursday Night Football. I wish Thursday Night Football wasn't a thing until after Thanksgiving, the good old days when we would only have 4 or 5 Thursday games all year long. The games are not good. The quality of the games are not good. It's too short of rest for a lot of these players. So get rid of Thursday Night Football will be good.
I love Chris Collinsworth too. He's my favorite commentator. It gets too much hate, unwarranted in my opinion. He just loves the game. But for Thursday Night Football, I do love the Amazon with analytics option. And
it's great.
I feel like, and people who watch football with me always hate it, but I'm like, the camera should be behind the quarterback, or we should be able to see the routes that these wide receivers are running, because we do miss out on a lot. And I don't know, would you ever be opposed to some sort of camera switch, either a zoom out or behind the QB?
We had it one time. There was a game on Sunday Night Football, Steelers-Titans, where the sideline camera broke and they had no option but to use the camera from behind the quarterback. And fans loved it. It was a really cool, they had a whole second half where it was just behind the quarterback. Now, I don't know if I'd want to watch every game that way, but as a change of pace, I think it'd be really cool for Amazon to be like, hey, we're going to be the broadcast where you're watching the game from behind the quarterback. We're the only one that's going to give you that broadcast every single week. I want to say I do love Amazon's broadcast. I'm still a big fan of Al Michaels. It reminds me of my childhood watching games. He's actually going to do the 20th Cowboys-Giants night game on Thursday, which is really cool. I just hate Thursday football in general.
Old school smash mouth, run it down your throat football, or modern high flying, spread it all out offense?
If you want to watch smash mouth football, just go watch Army, Navy, and Air Force play every week. We have those games in college every week. Go to your local high school, you'll see it. I want to see the best athletes on the field performing. I want to see the incredible catches. I want to see these DBs be left on an island and show just how athletic they are. I love watching pass rushers and offensive tackles go at it. You want to talk about the best athletes on the field. A lot of times it's those edge rushers who are 6'5", 270 pounds that can run in the 4.5s. That's the type of football I like watching. Again, you want to watch 55 carries in a game, go watch Army play. Come on.
Yeah, you won't get much passing. Hot or not Guardian caps?
Oh, I wish that Guardian caps were mandatory for every player in the league because we have studies that show that they work. I think they've done a good job of making them blend in with the regular helmets. There's a couple players that you don't even know are wearing them. If anything can help these players limit their risk of concussion, I'm all in. I think if everybody was wearing them, it would only take us a game or two for everybody to be used to it. I think we are going to get there at some point where every player in the league will be wearing a Guardian cap.
Right. And I mean, I'm with you. And maybe saying, it needs to be mandatory could turn some people off. But I feel like we could just restructure the helmet to kind of incorporate them.
They don't look bad. Honestly, I was worried that it was going to stick out on the broadcast. You watch some of these games and the players that are wearing them, it's not really noticeable until they zoom right in on a player. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I thought they weren't even going to have the like logo on the
Exactly.
like latex
Yes.
around. I'm like, oh, they're going to be running around like this. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, like leatherhead helmets. No, I think the NFL has done a good job of making them blend in. Now, maybe they wouldn't blend in if all 22 players on the field are wearing them, but I've been impressed.
Me too. And there'll always be fans that say like, oh, he's not being tough wearing it. I think anything, especially from a fan's perspective, that is going to get us to be able to keep watching this sport for years and years is a positive thing for us as well as for the players.
100% agree. And if you talk to some of these older players, and you see with some of the side effects that they've been dealing with playing in the NFL during, we call it the jacked up era. I'm sure everybody remembers on Monday Night Football when they would show you the biggest hits, of the week. I think it's pretty easy after you talk to some of these guys to come to the conclusion that the NFL needs to continue to be progressive when it comes to preventing concussions.
Definitely. Well put. That was it. Marcus, Super Bowl prediction. Who do you have? What's the final score?
I'm going to go with the 49ers over the Bills. I think this is the year the Bills get to the Super Bowl. Josh Allen is playing out of his mind right now, but I still have a hard time believing the 49ers aren't going to represent the NFC. And once they get to the Super Bowl, I think they're going to match up well with anybody. So I'll go 49ers over the Bills.
Okay. Do you have a final score so we can clip it?
Let's do 49ers 31, Bills 24.
Awesome. All right, everybody, clip that video. September 26th. This is far, before the Super Bowl.
That's right. You can hold me to it. It's fine.
Yeah, I think this was great. I mean, I love talking about football as much as the next guy. You definitely know your stuff. So any sort of socials or anything you want to drop for our viewers listening?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Go check out all of the picks over with the Geek picks. I'm going to try to beat the Geek. I'm going to try to get a good gap this week. I would like to see a 2 or 3 win gap. Can't wait to see it. It should be a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, guys. This was Marcus Mosher. And remember to sign up for our Beat the Geek Challenge. If you haven't already, at the link in our bio, you can win some great prizes. Marcus, thanks so much for joining.
Of course.